I thought it would be good to show my routine with checking my blood sugar. I've just woken up from a nap, and because I'm not using a CGM right now, I have to do the old style prick the finger and use a little meter until I can get an appointment probably next week with a diabetologist and get a new meter that's covered by the insurance instead of me paying for one. So it's not as horrible as it seems, although typically I do this. I usually don't go more than about 2 hours without checking the levels. So it can become a little annoying. And I'm using the VR so that the screen is a little bit bigger. So I'm at 17.2. 17.2. So for a guy without a pancreas, he's been asleep for a while, it's kind of middle of the road for me. Also, it's 3:20, so I'm spreading this test since I haven't had any in a few hours. I'm just spreading it over this half-hour period. So this chart is based on algorithms that have been developed for Jacob. They are proprietary algorithms, and what what we're trying to achieve with Jacob is predictive analysis. So most of typical diabetic care is reactive. You see your blood sugar values, you do some, let's say, rudimentary math on how much insulin it takes to bring that blood sugar level down. And a lot of it is guessing and trial and error, and it's not very exact. So, but it is medical and mathematical and statistical. And so, what we're trying to do, of course, it can be a very precise medical dosing protocol, but most people with diabetes either don't have the knowledge or it's too tedious and they don't want to put in the effort to do more accurate dosing. And so we hear about rage dosing where they can't get the blood sugar down. And so finally they put in a bigger dose of insulin, but they really overdose in insulin. And so then they need sugar at the bottom to bring it back up. And it can get a bit spicy trying to level out. So what ultimately we're trying to develop is a very safe, stable protocol to manage insulin. So anyway, 17.2, it's not very good. It really should be somewhere between maybe 5.5 and 6. And a normal person has no trouble staying there. It may pop up a little bit after eating a meal, but people without diabetes don't see numbers like 17.2. By the way, this is the European measurement. So if you're in the US, it would be a completely different number. I believe for the US, you can multiply that 17.2 by 18 to get a rough US unit. So these are millimoles per liter. And to give you an idea, a typical blood sugar monitor, a CGM, that would have a sensor plugged into the belly kind of thing, stops measuring around 22. This little meter here can go up to 33, and I have been out the top on both of them, not so infrequently. And so that's why I say 17.2 for me. It's not surprising. It does need to be adjusted down. Anything over 13, according to my oncologist, has the ability to suppress the immunotherapy. So that's quite important. The immunotherapy is the one thing that's actually keeping me alive, insulin being probably the number two thing. So the algorithms that we have in place are what's drawing these lines. I can probably just use let's see. My hands tend to point when I don't want them to. So the purple line is, well, let's start with the green line. The green line is what we just saw on the meter. That is my blood sugar level. So nothing fancy there. It's just charting the blood sugar as we go. With the continuous monitor, that measurement would be taken every 5 minutes. Every 30 minutes is about the max that I can reasonably do with finger pricks and that sort of thing. I don't typically do every 30 minutes. Usually it's every hour or 2 hours, depending on what's happening. So this is my current level. And like I said, because I took it at 315, I just split it. It's the first measurement of the day, and I need at least 2 dots to get some trends. So 17.2. The algorithm that I've developed has determined that in order to, let's say, instantly resolve the 17.2, I would need 10.2 units of insulin. Now, insulin doesn't come in tenths of a unit, so we would say this is 10 units, just typical rounding. If I want to use a syringe and a vial, then I could get pretty close to that 10.2, but the reality is the difference isn't significant, and these pens measure in whole units. So this is my insulin pen here, which you can't see because of where the screen is there. So this is the insulin pen here. I'm using Humulin R, which is the type of insulin, very specific type. So this is a calculation of the amount of insulin that I need in my body to resolve this 17.2 blood sugar level down to 5, not down to 0 because I don't want to die. So 5 right now in this chart is right between these two lines. That's where my blood sugar should be flying. So what we do is insulin, any type of insulin, any fast type of insulin, there's slow types of insulin. They don't work instantly. This isn't like taking a Tylenol and feeling better in 20 minutes. So what we'll see when I do calculate a dose in a minute, we'll see that there's roughly a 6-hour effective arc, and it's heavier in the front and has a longer tail in the back. And so 10.2 is what I should have in my body right now. So in other words, if I had 10.2, I wouldn't have 17.2 blood sugar, right? I'd be somewhere around normal, but I don't. So now I need to accumulate 10.2, but that is going to take time, and we're going to be over here in the chart somewhere by the time that level reaches. And while we're over here, this level will start already coming down. So if I put in 10.2 right now, it's going to be way too much insulin by the time we get over here, and then that long tail drags out, and I'm going to end up having to eat carbs or sugar or whatever to rescue my blood sugar from having too much insulin in it. So this is the problem with the current modern medicine and just using simple ratios of number of units to number of insulin, or number of carbs to number of I'm saying units up here, but millimoles, right? There's these ratios that most just will give you their standard. It is not a personalized ratio. And then you have to trial and error and experiment with how you feel or how well you measure on figuring out what those ratios are. And for somebody with type 2 diabetes, that's quite a bit more stable. Obviously, that's the most common diabetes that we hear about. Type 1 diabetes, it's a bit more spicy because the person's pancreas isn't producing enough insulin. And so the insulin dosing has to factor in what their pancreas does produce. For me, I have type 3C diabetes, and it's specific to when your pancreas is removed or damaged from an injury or surgery or something. And the reason it's a different type, it's compared a lot to type 1 because it is insulin dependent. But the reason it's a different type and considered more complex and more severe is that not only do I need to inject insulin to bring my blood sugar down, I will need to use carbs or sugar, which turn into carbs, or turn into blood sugar, I should say. I will need to use sugar to level out at the bottom. Otherwise, I will just continue going down and down and down. And the additional complexity that comes with not having a pancreas means that I'm also not producing digestive enzymes. There's enzymes for fat and protein, and I'm forgetting one, and fiber, right? So fat, protein, fiber all affect the reaction of and the behavior of your blood sugar. And so if I'm getting close to the bottom and I need to load in some carbs, I need very fast digesting carbs like liquid sugar, essentially, because I don't have the enzymes to digest food. And so a lot of food just goes through me very quickly, and I deal with malnourishment and anemia and low minerals and low electrolytes and low vitamins. And so there's quite a collection of pills and chewables and stuff that I take every day in addition to the insulin. So anyway, what is happening here, these, we'll call them the Jacob lines, are creating predictions over the next couple of hours of where these lines might fall along the way. And it's not necessarily saying that the prediction is by 4:30 that I'm going to be on this. This is a 4 line, right? So this would be 4 millimoles. That's not the prediction. And this isn't the prediction. What these are doing are predicting the arc of insulin that I need to create at a specific moment to start bringing that glucose down with the timing of the degradation of the insulin. That was a lot of words all at once. So let me just show you. This is at 17.2. Now, because I do this all day, every day, I do actually have a pretty good idea of how much insulin I need, but you'll see that even I have to guess. So now in Jacob, a user would not have to go grab that's a dosing bar. It's just a template that hangs out over there in the spreadsheet. It's now 3:30, so I'm going to pop this right at 3:30. And right now we're saying that we're going to put 0 units of insulin in, and you can see the chart hasn't changed at all because we haven't done anything. Let me start though by saying that this red bar at the bottom is actually insulin. This is a basal dose that happens every 24 hours at night. And basically it's a 48-hour dose we spread over every half hour because it just maintains a consistent state of a very base level of slow acting insulin. And that right now, based on my dose, which is about 20 units per day, comes out to be just a little less than a unit at any one time in my body. So there is some sort of, let's say, constant gravity against the glucose. And every once in a while, you can see these tabs down here. There's been lots of experiments. Every once in a while, we adjust the dose of this basal just based on how many times I need to actually correct insulin during the day and without creating so much gravity, let's say, that I'm constantly having to fight hypo events. So, but at 17.2, I'm going to say that I probably need about, let's say, 7 or 8 units. I'm going to start with 7. And what has happened is it's now calculated how much insulin is going to be on board at any one time. So let's look down here. Give it a second to draw that out. There we go. That was much longer than it usually takes. So you can see if I put that insulin in now at 3:30, it's not going to do anything for a while, right? It's going to be, this is 2 units here, 4 units. Now we're kind of making some progress and having some effect. 6 units, 7.5, 7.8, and so on. And what this means is we said, well, right now you need 10.2 units of insulin to resolve the 17.2 millimoles of blood sugar that's currently in the body. And that insulin has to ramp up its effectiveness, and then it's going to take a while to leave my body. And if you look along this line and add all these up, this is much higher than just 10.2. And if you look at each individual measurement, we never hit 10.2. And that is because of this bell curve, the effective time frame of that insulin. We have to spread it out with the insulin and create a prediction that this glucose will just come right down to about this peak at 6 o'clock. And as I say, it just sort of slips down the back of the mountain like a skier. And we want it to stop actually in between, let's say, 4 and 6, and just kind of level out as the insulin finally wears off. That is the ideal scenario. One of the other tricks with not having a pancreas is that it doesn't matter how predictive your science is. You still have to have that reactive, constant measuring to make sure that there's not something in your body that's either bringing the glucose up or making it come down too fast. So we'll take constant measurements through this period. Let me go ahead just so that I stay close to this 330 mark and put this insulin in my body. So this was based off of, this arc was drawn based off of 7 units. I always forget that I can't use the, can't use the virtual reality controller to scroll in here. So that was based off 7 units, which will peak at 6 o'clock. It's a 2.5 hour onboarding for this type of insulin. And this is a fast acting insulin. And this 0.8, like I mentioned over here, is the addition of this basal dose. The blue area is the dose I'm putting in. And so this pink shaded area is the total combined effective insulin that's in my body at any one time. And if I had a double dose in here, you would see why that matters. And actually, let me get this into my body just so we don't miss the timing. Fortunately for me, I don't think you can see me injecting this into my body, which some of you appreciate. Fortunately for me, injecting it into the belly is actually the fastest absorption rate for most people. And let me just plug in. I'm getting a low battery. And it certainly is for me. Fortunately for me, because of the surgeries I've had, I have no sensation in the right side of my abdomen on the skin, fairly deep actually. So the fact that I have to poke my fingers is annoying because I do feel that. But the injections into my belly, I have zero sensation whatsoever. So that's kind of convenient. Okay, so I did not talk about the safety protocols. I just did that all mentally. So I'll come back to that in a second. Actually, let me explain it now while we're looking at it. So I mentioned that it could be 7 or 8 units. And the reason that I went with 7 and I got the right dose initially is we look at 2 points on the arc and where these lines are drawn. So, and the colors are meaningful. So the purple line is based off of the insulin requirements. The green line is based off of my blood sugar. And what these are doing are creating safety parameters. So as I said, it is predicting what my glucose is going to do, what the effect of the insulin will be, but it's not drawing these lines because we know the body is fairly unpredictable. And mathematically, we can say, yes, this should resolve and it's an ideal dose, but we can't really predict truly what these 2 numbers are going to do going along the chart. We can predict this one in the sense that we know what we're injecting into the body, but in terms of what it says that we need in the body, that is based off of the glucose. So these are our safety lines that help with calculating the dose. So at 7 units, which is what the peak of this dose is, in 1 hour, the effective insulin in my body will be 4 units. And what this line is showing for the insulin on board need at that point is it's not recommending that I go over that, because it knows, based on the prediction, that this arc is increasing to 7.8, right? So it's saying don't put more than 7 units in, because at this 1 hour mark, you're going to be at 4 units. And that is about the rate of decline that we want to safely bring that glucose down without creating a hypo event, low blood sugar. Then at the 2 hour mark, which is a important, so 1 hour, I'm sorry, 1.5 hours. This is 1 hour here at the 4.0. This is the 2 hour mark. And in diabetic management, the 1 hour mark behind an event, whether it's food or dosing, and the 2 hour mark are very useful for creating those predictions or adjusting doses or carbs or anything, just because of the rate of how things absorb. So this whole chart is broken down into 30 minutes, and that's because food can take 20 to 30 minutes to really absorb, except for sugars and that are easy to digest. And insulin has about the same, depending on each body, a range of 20 to 30 minutes to onboard, right? And that's why at 3:30, there's no effect from the insulin. At 4, it starts to, be present in my body and active. And then it just kind of shoots up and then wears off over time. So this mark here says don't put a high enough dose in that brings you above this line within the next hour. That's our safety measure. At the 1.5 hour mark, we have a second safety point. So we're trying to predict where we're going to be at the 2 hour mark. So 1.5 hour is a safety check. And it's the same thing. We don't want this arc encroaching outside of this green line. We want to keep both of these points, whichever one hits first. And usually they're both pretty close to the safety lines. But whichever one hits first becomes the limiter. So here we hit it at an hour. Here it could have been a half or 1.5 hour. So we would have seen that if the glucose was higher, it would have raised, the dose a little bit. This line would be steeper and we might have hit that green line as well. So this is 7 units was completely safe. Let me just show you what it looks like if we put in too much insulin. And that was just showing you what happens when I hit the wrong button. So let's say that I put in 10 units based on the traditional calculation. Okay? This is the traditional calculation, what a diabetic or diabetologist would typically calculate for somebody with 17.2 glucose at any moment. So now you can see that at the 1 hour mark, because here's our dose back here at 3:30, that's when we put it in. The 1 hour mark, we only needed to be at 4 by that point, but we're going to be at 5.3. So already we've got too much insulin. And the second mark here at 1.5 hours or 90 minutes, way outside this green line, right? And so what would happen is this glucose would drop pretty steep. We'd probably, let's say, crash the airplane into the front of the mountain somewhere and dig right through it. And what that creates is a surplus of insulin against the blood sugar in the body. And that's just going to, as it comes through this peak, it's going to just steepen all the way down and create a hypo event. That's what these lines are protecting against. If put this back to 7, this is also my record for the day of what I've put in. The reason that is so important, I'm just going to lay in another, excuse me, thank you, another dose. So it's not unusual at the peak of one dose to put in another dose. For example, particularly because this is, dinner time in here, right? I'm going to eat some food. And so this initial dose is good for the blood sugar that I have right now. But if I eat food, I need more insulin because I'm going to have more blood sugar. So this may actually be an accurate prediction based off of what carbs I might eat and whatever. So let's say at 6 o'clock, you can't really see this line coming down to 6 o'clock. I put in another 7 units. And that seems harmless enough. And, 7 was good before. It must be good now, right? What happens, this is called insulin stacking, where the initial dose of insulin is still running out of my body, well until 9 p.m., I think. And then we put in another dose at 6:30. So that's, 2.5 hours where I've got two doses working. And that's why this pink shaded area is so important. This is what many people with diabetes, particularly type 1, don't understand about their insulin. Insulin stacking can be very dangerous, and most doctors would say to avoid it, wait the full, you know, lifetime of your insulin before putting in another dose. In my case with type 3C, I need to stack. The doses need to be frequent and they need to be strong enough because I've got no other option to bring that blood sugar down. Yes, I can go run a marathon and burn some energy, and that does help. I can go for walks, I can do physical activity, but I also have to remember that I still have two cancers, and those cancers have taken a toll on my body. I have anemia that takes obviously a toll on my energy. So while I'm active around the house and doing, normal movements and activities, it is very easy, I've learned by trying, very easy for me to sustain injuries by normal behavior because it's, healing, and healing creates, so my balance between food and blood sugar and insulin is a constant through the day. And this pink shaded area is what I have to live by. So I've got to make sure that there's not enough in here. And you can see what happens. Both of these doses are only 7 units at a time. But because they're stacked in the middle here, it actually increases the effectiveness because I still have this insulin on board when this insulin is coming on board. And you can see that increases the peak from what was 7.8 over here to 9.2 over here. And this dose, we said, was already enough to bring this glucose down, down the backside of this mountain. And suddenly I have this other mountain of insulin that is going to require food or sugar or something to account for having resolved this. So this dose probably going to be much later in the evening, depending on what I decide to eat here and how many carbs that includes and what I need this peak to look like once that resolves. So let me just take out this little dose in here because that was just for educational purposes, right? So this is back to where we were looking before. So I had 17.2 glucose. I've put in 7 units of insulin. I'm hoping that ideal circumstances allow me to get down probably to this peak around 6 o'clock. And I'm pointing to this line. This is the line that's actually going to come down to the peak, right? We're predicting the insulin and the effects of the insulin to bring down that glucose. And there's part of the algorithm is actually the distance between these lines is also part of the prediction. So while the 10.2 is going to come down, right down these two lines, you can see there's about 3 lines between them, right? So this is, or let's say there's 7 millimoles between them because this is 10.2, this is 17. So when I'm at 7.8, my glucose is going to be somewhere still around 14. if we've dosed this right. And then when my insulin is coming down the backside, this will start to narrow. And it's typically right about, for me, it's around 5 to 5.5 millimole difference, which means that ideally when my insulin is at 0, that my blood sugar is at about 5.5 or 6. And that's the perfect spread, right? So this is unique to the behavior of my body as this arc resolves, and also the distance or the ratio of insulin to blood sugar in my body. And that is based on my own sensitivity factor and all kinds of stuff. Trade secrets there. Okay, so normally this is all of 30 seconds of process. I, check my blood sugar. I put in the number. It draws the lines. As you saw, I can look at 17.2 and think that's going to be somewhere between 7 and 8 units if it's the first dose and, like it is today. Make sure that I'm within the safety markers on that arc, inject it into my body, and then I'm free to move about the cabin, so to speak. Any adjustments I need are going to be based on what carbs I put in my body over the next 6 hours. So dinner at some point would be nice. Maybe an evening snack at some point would be nice. And so I will come back to this chart and remeasure the blood, see what it is. When I eat food, I actually can calculate very roughly how much insulin that specific meal requires in addition to what I put in to resolve this glucose over here. And so I may come in and put in another dose as long as it still is staying within the safety markers. So, but I want to see what the effect is. So I need at least an hour before I can get anything meaningful. If I check in half an hour, yeah, it might come down, but it's not enough to really change anything in terms of dosing or whatever. So I'll be back at 4:30 and take a new measurement. And actually, in reality, knowing my body, let me finish my first sentence first. 4:30 would be a good point to check, right? Because this line's moving over, these lines are going to move over, and it's just a safety check to make sure that I'm still, properly aligned with the arc of my insulin. But I do know 17.2 is going to take a while to resolve, right? That's going to be 9 p.m. or later by the time that I'm down into a normal range. So poking my finger every hour even is really annoying. So I still stay in this safety area. And what this safety area is telling me also is that I need to check my blood sugar again no later than 6. That's the peak of this insulin. It's when it's at its strongest. I need to make sure I'm not coming down too fast if I haven't eaten food, right? So this is a limit right here. What I typically do is I will check at the second marker that I talked about. So where we would be looking inside this green line, and that's going to be 5 o'clock from when I dosed. So about an hour and a half. Yes, I did that math correctly. An hour and a half. So at 5 o'clock, I'll take another measurement of my blood sugar. Everything will have adjusted here, and I can see if I need a little bit more insulin or if I'm coming down a little too fast. And that is going to inform decisions and choices for me around dinner time. If I'm coming too fast, I know to eat a bit earlier and maybe add, more carbs to the meal. If I'm coming down too slow and I need more insulin, then I'll take that opportunity to correct whatever trajectory my glucose is doing, if it's, coming in too shallow, so to speak, and add enough insulin to cover whatever meal I decide. So that 5 o'clock mark over here gives me time to make those choices and prepare a meal and, be eating around 6 or so. I may have some coffee with some milk in it. Milk has very light carbs, but they are carbs. And so that might actually shallow out this number a little bit. And since I slept quite late today, just from being low on energy. I don't have any food in me yet since yesterday. So I may actually end up having a banana or something over here. That's going to slow this glucose decline down. And I really want to leave this dose in as it is. So it's not going to be, when I come back at 5, it's not going to be ideal. It's not going to be, purely glucose and insulin working together. There's going to be a banana and some coffee in there. And that is what daily living is like. This is all amazing science. It is being published in medical papers. It will be reviewed by physicians and clinical trials. That is a reminder to check my glucose at 4 o'clock. That was left over from yesterday. So this will all be reviewed and confirmed. But what this would look like in Jacob is a conversation. So all of this is happening in the background in a very deterministic way, not in a, AI language model doing math. But, Jacob would be able to understand, and he does today. So I'm patient 1. This is already being trialed and experimented with me in a very clinical sense. But, I can tell Jacob, hey, my glucose is 17.2. He would instantly see that I have not done any measurements today. So this is a first measurement. And that does affect when we don't have the numbers before and can't really see a trend. It affects these safety markers. It actually brings them a bit lower and creates more conservative constraint around how much insulin to put in, because we don't know, was I at 20 an hour before, or was I at 17 an hour before? We don't know what this trend looks like before because I'm missing my CGM. If I had my CGM, he'd have that data every 5 minutes and we wouldn't see this empty space. But anyway, he can see my glucose, and he has, as part of my medical profile, which he has all of my medical records, he knows the spacing here. He knows what this line is going to be. This is all, again, like I said, deterministic math happening in the background. He would see these safety markers, and he would be able to know where I say, oh, this is going to be 7 or 8 units. He would actually know 7 units is going to have me at 4.0 right at this line in an hour. And so he would be able to say, based on your chart and your glucose and your profile, this should be a 7-unit dose. And of course, because Jacob is not a doctor, he would also say, make sure that you agree, chat with your doctor, follow your own protocols, kind of thing. But so there is some safety and good guardrails built into Jacob that will tell you this is what the calculation shows, just like I see it on Excel, that 7 units is the right dose. But ultimately, at the end of the day, I have to know my body. I have to know how well the insulin works. I have to be my own doctor and decide what that dose is going to be. I have to inject it in my body. That's not something Jacob can do. So there's some, of course, disclaimers and that sort of thing. But this is very accurate so far. And this has been tested in several different theories, as well as over a long time. We're getting close to a year of data, which is why I'm able to look at this and essentially just visualize the chart now. And that is also important. What I learned by accident is when I go on a trip and I'm on the plane and there's no internet, if I don't remember to take a local copy of this Excel sheet onto my phone or something, then I don't have all the calculations and stuff that it's doing in the background. And the last time I traveled, I literally had to visualize this in my head, which I'm able to do, and know that I needed, for a 17 millimole or whatever it was on that day, how many units of insulin would be safe to do. And I just, in a little notepad app on the phone, make sure that I record the time that I took the dose and all of that, since I can't put it into the Excel. So A travel tip for me is make sure that this is always a local copy on my phone so that it can do the math. All right, that's enough about insulin and glucose and blood sugar. This is just one of the aspects of something that I have to manage and track constantly, 24/7. It matters whether I track it or not. And it's part of what my life looks like these days and what it will always look like. My pancreas will never magically reappear. And so this is something that I have to do for the rest of my life as long as I'm alive. I thought maybe it would be interesting to see a kind of unusual scenario in insulin management that I deal with. And particularly because I'm between diabetologists right now. My previous one has left the practice, and I'm going to have an appointment with a new one, and of course, have to review my case and prescriptions and all that kind of stuff. But the previous doctor left me with enough supplies for quite some time, actually. And under their advisement, when my slow acting insulin ran out, which is today, I have a supply of another type of long acting insulin. And so I'm switching from Tresiba to Insulatard, and that should bridge the gap until I can see the doctor and see which insulin they want to keep me on and whatever. So both insulins are ones that I've used and just have extra supply of. And so, but what is interesting about that, first of all, my blood sugar is at 25.7. That is really high. And of course, I've had dinner and some snacks. So I've got the insulin on board that if you saw the previous video, both of these doses were talked about in that, and I explained this pink shaded areas actually showing the effective onboard insulin at any moment. So 25.7, very high. Even for me, it's not unusual, but it's very high. So, but without a pancreas, that's kind of what happens. As soon as carbs go into my system, I've got to cover it with lots and lots of insulin to get it back down. So, this will be a process that takes several hours to do it safely. But what I wanted to show actually isn't my high blood sugar, but actually the two insulins working together. So, these kind of shorter are from the Humulin R, and that is considered a fast acting or rapid effective insulin. Probably more appropriately to say that it's fast acting, it's not necessarily rapid. So, those are 6-hour arcs of when that insulin is effective in my body, and it has a peak that is slightly to the front of the dose and then kind of a longer tail, and you just can't see the tail because it's covered up by another dose that I took earlier. So these two doses are doing the job, and I can see actually that even with 25.7 blood sugar, that right now it's a little bit strong. This pink shaded area is outside of this insulin safety measurement here. So it's just a little bit strong, but at 25.7, that's not a bad thing at all. This needs to turn around and really start coming back down. Over here, this green dose is much, much longer. This is a 16-hour, is that right? 16-hour or 12-hour? I think it's 16-hour effective window. So I'm just thinking, I think it's 12 hours. So unlike Tresiba, that's a 42-hour effective window that you take every 24 hours, and it creates a just constant flat dose that stays in your body. The Insulatard is different, and so it does have an arc that needs to be measured. It has, as opposed to just a single peak, it has more of a tabletop peak. So for about an hour and a half, almost a 2 hour spread if we kind of look on both sides of this, is when it's at its peak effectiveness. But you can see if I put this in at 9 o'clock now, that it's going to be in my system well into 9 o'clock in the morning. Oh, 9 o'clock over here, right? So that's a 12-hour span. The reason that I think this is interesting and it's important is it's showing how Jacob, our AI system, can handle multiple types of insulin being put in the body and understand the effective arcs of when that insulin is on board and what the cumulative effect of that insulin overlapping actually has. So, in fact, even though I'm at 25.7 right now, which is very high and it does need to be corrected, for US people, you can multiply this by 18, and that would give you a number well over 600. Let's do the math for the US people. This is not math that I do in my head. Got my little hands all pointing. Right, so 25.7 times 18 would give you 462. I I think that is the correct math. Don't quote me on that. I am not a doctor because I'm thinking that should have been around 600 actually. So 25.7. There we go. 462. Huh, look at me. I am smart. Multiply by 18. So 462. Now, anybody on the type 1 diabetes Instagram trend will tell you that 462 is very scary, and it is for many people. I don't have a pancreas. So, in fact, I have a small portion of the pancreas that was left in my body, and that because of the cancer and because of the surgery itself, that tissue died. And so I have a dead lump inside my body at the moment that is no longer a functioning pancreas. And at some point, that may have to be removed. So 25.7, yes, it can be scary. Right now, I can feel it in my body because I'm aware, but for the most part, it's not really interfering with, anything that I'm doing. It can be tough on kidneys and it can be tough on the immune system and all kinds of stuff. So like I said, it needs to be corrected, but it is not so scary to me because it's not so unusual, where for many people that could be a scary number. What is more scary is that number plummeting down to the bottom of this chart where I would go into a hypo event. And so anytime you're adjusting insulins and whatever, this could be quite scary because this is a long lasting insulin. Once it goes in my body, there is no coming out. There's not an undo button. So if this dosing is incorrect and it's too strong, then I'll spend my whole night eating sugar and drinking juice and, whatever else to accommodate this insulin. But this is the conservative dose that my doctor gave me, and I've been on Insulatard before, and doing 7 in the morning and 7 at night was fairly stable, but it does change the way that I have to manage carbs going into my body and whatever. So it's quite a bit stronger than the Tresiba. It does have an arc instead of being flat. And so these are all things that I now have to adjust for just because I'm switching insulins. So in order to get this in my body, though, we've got to do some assembly. So Insulatard is kind of a unique medication, or it's a unique type of medication. My fingers are pointing everywhere. I don't see where my other controller is, so I can't get rid of the hand pointing. There we go. Think that'll get rid of it? Maybe not. Anyway, it's a unique type of insulin in that you can see it's a little bit cloudy, right? I'm trying to get my hands out of the way. There we go. So it's a little bit cloudy. And because of that, any type of insulin that has that sort of, white cloudy look in it, it needs to be rolled and kind of warmed up a little bit because this is fresh out of the refrigerator so that cloudiness is even. So I'm just going to like roll it in my hands, and hopefully that's not going to do any craziness to the screen, right? And we just take a look, and it's still kind of thick in the bottom here. So just needs to be warmed up. This can't, some insulins, you can pull it out of the fridge and shoot it straight into your body. Like the Humulin R is pretty liquidy like that. But it's very important that this gets mixed and is evenly cloudy, because it's a mixture. And so you need to make sure that the whole mixture goes in evenly. And I probably could have taken this out of the fridge a little bit earlier. That's looking pretty good. All right. And then now that I'm switching insulins, I've also got to switch the pin that I'm using. So this pin is designed for this cartridge, and it just snaps down into there. And then you've got these needle tips. So this is an 8mm needle, and it just goes in like that. Come on. I swear. Now what are we doing? There we go. Thank you very much for playing along. Right, that's got a little cap on it. The first shot of insulin, that's still not quite as even as I would like it. Let me just cap this real quick. That's better. All right, so we're putting in 7 units. The first time that you use a new cartridge, we just dial it up to 2 units, and nothing came out. Right, so we kind of got to prime it. I'm just basically feeling for insulin to shoot out into my hand. I'm not going to stab my hand. And it can take a few shots to get that going. Basically, this little plunger has to go down far enough. Come on. Usually it doesn't take quite this much. Just want to make sure. Let's just see. This might actually have a little bit of a problem. Doesn't seem like that is actually plumbing. There we go. There we go. Now I've got insulin coming out. So this is just a much shorter cartridge, and I just needed that plunger to come much further than it was. All right, so we're back to 7 units. And this time we'll go into the belly. I mentioned in another video that I don't have any sensation in my belly from the surgeries. So this is an absolutely painless process. So that is 7 units of Insulatard in the body. And now I can keep this unrefrigerated for the 30 days or so that this will last. But typically, since I only take this one twice a day, as opposed to the Humulin R that is constant throughout the day, I'll put this one back in the fridge, and it just helps it preserve longer. And so that leaves us then, this got all moved around. So now I have this little green mountain in here that's going to last me until morning. And because this is a fresh change in the protocol, it does mean that like at midnight and probably 2:30 or 2, like every couple of hours, I'm going to have to wake up and just make sure that everything's okay. I'm not coming down too fast and that kind of stuff. It also, in the morning, I go to the institute to get blood work done because this is a treatment week. So I've got a cancer treatment on Thursday. Wednesday is a lab day, and typically I'm there around 8 in the morning. So, where things can get a little complicated is I may need to put in the daytime dose probably around 8 or 9 just to keep it in my body. And that's the time that I'm like, getting into taxis and dealing with the wheelchair and all of that. So it can make life, slightly complicated. I've got to remember to, not only pack my normal insulin, but pack this one because I'll be out and away from the house when it's time to do that dose. And so actually I still need to get ready to go to the institute tomorrow. So that will be my next video and I'll get to introduce you to Miles. But I think this is pretty fascinating to see the sort of thinking system that is going into Jacob because the spreadsheet has a lot of sort of trade secrets and algorithms in it that will be part of Jacob. And this is how Jacob will think in terms of insulin dosing.